Hello and welcome to episode 2 of Argenta Private Capital's latest podcast series, Voices of Change, Women Transforming Capital and Risk. This initiative has been designed as a part of our broader International Women's Day message, where we're celebrating women across the insurance and financial services sector. Today, we are delighted to be joined by a guest who brings deep wealth management sector knowledge, where we'll be discussing changes across the industry, both for investors and those working in the sector. We'll look at the great wealth transfer and what this might mean for future wealth. And we'll also try and nab some of her expert advice after an impressive 30-year career. My name is Marnie Hunter, and I am a marketing associate at Argenta Private Capital, and I'm delighted to be the host of today's podcast episode. So this week, we are really excited to be joined by Annabel Bosman, who is a Senior Director and Regional Centre Head for London and South East at RBC Brewin Dolphin. Before stepping into this role, Annabel was Head of Relationship Management for RBC Wealth Management across the UK and Channel Islands. And as a part of the leadership team, Annabel is focused on helping Brewin thrive and making sure clients get the very best from the organisation. Annabel first began her career at Barclays and has since worked at Citi, Deutsche Bank and Julius Baer before joining RBC in July 2019. Annabel also holds a master's from Oriel College, Oxford, and is a member of the CFA Institute. Annabel, thank you so much for joining us today, and a very warm welcome to you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. So your title sounds fantastic. Could you tell us a little bit more about what that actually means and what it looks like in your day-to-day?
Yeah, sure. So RBC Brewin Dolphin is part of RBC Wealth Management in Europe. And our responsibility is to look after clients with somewhere between £500,000 and up across the whole of the UK. So my responsibility is, as it sounds, London and the South East. So as you'd imagine, very big team in London, but also some of the regional offices, Winchester, Oxford, Cambridge, all fall under my remit. So day to day is really looking after the teams, making sure that they are bringing the very best of RBC Brewin to our clients. So everything from getting involved in origination strategies, supporting with sales, down to some of the minutiae that you might imagine that come with a fairly big team to manage. So yeah, lots of varied day-to-day activities.
Absolutely. No day's the same, I guess. So, I mean, thinking about, obviously you look after quite a large team. From your perspective, how have you seen either, private capital markets or the wealth management sphere evolve for women, both as investors and as professionals over time?
It's changed a lot. I mean, actually, when you were reading out the intro, I was reflecting that it's closer to 30 years. And as the background of the client has evolved, we've evolved our sales and relationships teams to match that. So as you might imagine now, wealth creation happens across gender, across a whole myriad of backgrounds in different areas. And we have to match that with our relationship team. So it makes it a lot more exciting. I think when you're hiring, it means that you can be more creative about your hiring, and you can challenge the headhunters and the recruiters that you're speaking to make sure that we are really keeping up with that changing face of the client.
Interesting. Oh, I can imagine it's been, not without its challenges, but a kind of a privilege to watch that evolve over time.
Yeah, it makes life a little bit more interesting than just dealing with the same types of clients. So yeah, it's good.
Absolutely, I would agree. And then in that same breath, I suppose we hear a lot about the great wealth transfer at the moment, and its impact over the next 30 years, both for the next generation of investors and also inheriting spouses. Has this resulted in seeing more women taking control of their wealth and making independent investment decisions?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we put out a survey a couple of years ago looking at how the different genders approach that wealth management decision making. And what we know is more women than men look for advice. So 83% of women want advice around managing their wealth versus 67% of men. That is a definite shift. You make the point really well. I think when we talk about the wealth transfer, lots of people assume that it will be down the generations. But of course, the first step is so often across between spouses. So we've been very deliberate about making sure that our advisors are including all parties to relationships. So certainly when I was starting out, it typically was a man making financial decisions. It could be the spouse holding assets in their name, but typically they weren't involved in some of that decision making. And that shifted partly on the part of wealth managers, making sure that they are bringing all parties into those conversations. But also, we've seen more and more spouses want to come to the table and really understand what they're investing in, why they're investing, the decisions that are being made, which is really good. And I hope we see that continue.
Absolutely. I mean, it's so important that you hear so many stories all the time of people that don't fully understand what it is their family, their husband's invested in, and it leaves it a real mess both for advisors and the family.
Absolutely.
And then I'm curious, obviously the great wealth transfer is a huge driver of that, but do you think there's other influencing factors that have led more women to show more of an interest in finances?
I think quite often when you have a couple in a room, you realize some of the differences. And I'm going to generalize here because you always end up generalizing when you talk about gender. But there are differences in the way that men and women approach managing wealth. And so, as a general rule, men will think of wealth as an end in itself, whereas
Mhm.
women think of wealth as a way to achieve a series of ends. And you quite often see that with next generation again as well. So women often are thinking about making a difference, whether it's their own family, whether it's in the broader community. So quite often a little bit more altruistic in the way that they approach wealth. And that really fits well with the changes that we've seen across the wealth management industry. So we're no different from a lot of our peers in thinking about wealth as a means to answer a series of questions rather than it simply being about generating the best returns. I think that the industry has really moved on in the last couple of decades. And that is driven by having to answer to a different audience, which again, I think is well, it makes life more interesting. And it's certainly if you speak to any of our advisors, what do they love about the job? They love being able to help families, help individuals, help couples really think through what they want to achieve through their wealth.
That's a really nice way of putting it. I think what you're alluding at is that holistic approach to what they're building.
Absolutely.
That's really interesting. I'm wondering, I mean, you might not have an example off the top of your head, but do you have any kind of experiences with clients where you can see these trends that have really accelerated? If you're thinking about your day to day, have you got an example of a client?
I can think of lots of examples where we've had clients in the room, and it's obviously the first time that they've had that conversation as a couple. So I can think back when I was advising clients, a couple of conversations where most of the groundwork had been done with husband. We then bring wife into the room and we're running through our understanding of what they're looking to do and some quite interesting dialogue where they're sort of looking at each other and she's saying, well, absolutely not, that's not what I wanted to do. Particularly when it comes to the children, you quite
Mhm.
often see some flashpoints. And I suppose it is quite a privileged position. It can be a bit of a tricky position. We end up as being quite adept mediators in those conversations, but it's quite a privileged position to be in to help facilitate those conversations. And again, thinking back to when I started out, I think I'm British. British famously don't particularly like talking about their finances, even with someone, with a spouse, someone that, they're sharing their day-to-day life with. Quite often they haven't had that conversation. So I think over the last few years, we've seen that transition. We see now people more comfortable in having those oftentimes challenging conversations with each other. And being in the room is oftentimes difficult, but really, really interesting to watch.
In a way, you become an extension of the family business. Sometimes it feels like it, even though on paper, definitely not.
Yeah, you too.
It becomes so involved in the emotions and the decisions over years. So yeah, I can really understand that.
Yeah, you have to play a very straight bat, and
Look,
you see that you're not taking either side. Don't let the eye eye contact change.
Exactly. No, that's really interesting. Thank you. If we flip it back to, your experience in wealth management and obviously on the advisor professional side, what barriers do you think still exist for women in wealth management, and what steps do you think the industry might be able to take to overcome them?
It's really interesting actually because I've always works with the theory that out of all the financial services sector, wealth management is a great place for women to end up because ultimately, as an advisor, you can design your business plan. Once you get to a certain point, there's an element of pain to get there. You quite often inherit clients. They might not be the types of clients that you choose to work with, but ultimately you will get to a point where you can start to design your business plan around the types of clients that you want to work with. I've seen some of the advisors here really play that to their advantage. They can set the expectations with clients when they're available, when they're not available. So I've always felt it's quite a female friendly sector within financial services to work in. All of that said, we still don't have as many female advisors as we would like. I think part of that is often the interview process, the fact that most organizations will ask you to provide a business plan on your way in, and women are famously reticent at putting numbers to a piece of paper and saying, this is what I commit to delivering over 1 to 3 years. If I rewind back to when I was advising and I was actually moving a team from one organization to another, and it was the men who were sitting next to me who were encouraging me to put the numbers that I was putting to our business plan to make sure that we were an attractive proposition to the hiring organization. We quite often have conversations because I'm very passionate about trying to bring women into wealth management and into RBC Brewin. So we quite often have to have conversations on the way in with them, with the headhunter about what we might expect to see within a business plan, and the fact that it is okay to sell yourself and to back yourself by putting some realistic but optimistic numbers in there. The other element is hiring managers, oftentimes, again, lots of men still, so challenging them to think differently, making sure that we're not just hiring constantly in our own image. I quite often challenge headhunters to make sure that they're not looking in the same places, that we're thinking laterally about people who make good wealth managers, male or female. They don't have to come from a certain background. They don't always have to come with clients, but we should be thinking quite creatively about that. So it's better. It's still not where I would like it to be, which would be, ideally 50-50 on the advisor front. But good women are hard to find, hard to hire.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's what you talk about with putting yourself out there and selling yourself as a woman. You can see it. It's the clear difference between my male friends and my female friends of how they present themselves. It's interesting.
Yes, you definitely see a lot of the sort of the classic tiara syndrome where women are just sitting and waiting for someone to notice that they would be a great hire, whereas men will typically say, well, I've ticked all the boxes, so of course they'll want to hire me. So we have to challenge that as hiring managers. We have to challenge that.
Yeah, absolutely. And then reflecting on your own career journey, are there any obstacles or challenges that stand out to you, and how do you think they shaped your career and also your leadership style, perhaps?
I think I've been really lucky in that I've had some great role models in people who I've reported into. Somebody was asking me the other day who my best and worst bosses were, and I have to say my best boss was a woman and my worst boss was also a woman, which was quite interesting. So I think you learn different bits from lots of different people until you evolve your own leadership style. With 30 years, almost 30 years under my belt, my leadership style and the version of me at work is closer than it's ever been to the version of me at home, which is nice. At RBC, we're really passionate about bringing your authentic self to work. It makes work much less tiring if you're not having to put a mask on all the time. So that is definitely something that I've learned in terms of my own career journey. It's not always been a straight uphill journey. There've been lots of parallel moves, sideways moves. I remember somebody once saying to me, your career journey is rarely a straight line going up. It's often more like an obstacle course and you're just grabbing the next opportunity. But all of that said, I've never been one to shy away from that next step up, next opportunity. I sometimes drive myself a bit mad because I'm sort of constantly thinking, what's next? How do I challenge myself? How do I stretch myself? Which I think is an important lesson.
In a way that kind of tied into my next question. My final question is about what advice you would give to women when they're aspiring to build a career in private capital or wealth management or something within the financial services realm. What would you tell them?
Well, I'd love to say that my advice is exactly what I practice all the time, or certainly that I practiced at the early stage. But I think thinking through your own finances is a great place to start. Start investing if you're interested in markets, whether they're private or public. Start investing. Start now, start small. You don't have to take huge risk. But it's a great way of putting yourself in the shoes of clients and thinking through the types of questions that ultimately you will be asking your clients. And so that would be number one. Number two would be think through your business plan. If you do want to end up as a relationship manager or a wealth advisor, what types of clients do you want to work with? And if I think through some of the really good relationship managers that I've worked with, they align the types of clients that they work with quite closely to who they are, their hobbies, their interests. We have one guy in here who loves playing golf and swears that is how he gets his clients, and hey, it seems to work. So I think that's a really good way to get started. Think about your USPs and what you would bring to a certain type of client. You might not be able to do it from day one, but just having that you can articulate and you can talk to people when you go and speak to wealth management firms about potentially starting work, I think is a really good starting point to have.
Amazing. I mean, I think there's particularly even a shift within my, short career has been that it feels like we're becoming more human at work. And what you say about being your authentic self is amazing. And the fact that you feel like you're quite close to who you are at home, at work, is really incredible because you spend so much time at work.
That's it. My husband and my kids would say I'm much bossier at home, but there's no one here to argue that one. So
Exactly. Semantics. This has been absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us for our little International Women's Day podcast series. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you, and I'm sure your insights will resonate with the audience, whether they are on the investor side, next generation side, or looking to build a career in wealth management. So thank you, Annabel.
thank you, Marnie.
Thank you for tuning in to episode 2 of our podcast series. Stay tuned next week for episode 3, where Kate Tunn, Executive Director at Argenta Private Capital, will be speaking with Rachel Turk at Lloyds.